Okay. All right. So I'm recording this session for your reference later. All right. So before we start with quiz, of course, we have to discuss another topic, and this is the final topic that you will be receiving from me. After this, you will continue with the rest of the topics with Dr. Yasrina after this. Okay, the same time, the same session, lecture session, which is every Friday, 3 to 5 p.m. Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's talk about this week's topic, piracy, and particularly software piracy. So this is an action or situations that is very close to us as IT professionals, as IT users, as IT developers, okay, or software developers, or tools, or any applications, or systems developers, okay. So this particular issue that has a very significant impact in terms of our ethical behavior and our ethical decision on software piracy. Why is someone sharing screen?
Sorry, Doktor. Saya tertekan. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So today's topic, we're going to talk about software piracy. Now, before we go to the piracy, a little bit of a background for an understanding on the context of piracy, and this is something that we all have an idea and have an understanding in terms of the software industry. So all of us in computing and IT are within the same realm of industry, although it's a software industry, but all of us in computing, either we are part of the development of the technology in terms of the software, or as a user of a software for any of our roles in the industry. Okay, so now in the software industry, this is actually a very big industry. So it's a huge industry that requires a lot of research and development. So all the softwares that we are using now. So right now we are users of software. For example, now we're using this Microsoft Teams. Okay, this is a software. And in order for this software to be implemented, to be used, okay, to be available commercially, a lot of research and development has been put into place for it to be stable, for it to be safe, for it to be usable. Okay, so all of this requires research and development, and the process of this research and development to develop these softwares requires a lot of money. So it's a huge investment type of industry. Okay, so a big amount of capital, big amount of money involved, and it's very expensive. Okay, the entire process of this research and development of a software is not a cheap process. Okay, so it is expensive. Now, when it is expensive, it needs to be protected. Okay, so in terms of software, context of software, as it is expensive or costly, all software must be protected. And it must be protected in what sense? What kind of protection that we're talking about? We are talking about protections from a legal point of view, which means there should be laws and regulations put into place to protect the value of these softwares, because it was very expensive in terms of solutions, okay, to be available. Okay, however, when it is expensive, on a flip side, this causes people, or causes the scenario where these softwares are being copied. Okay, so because the software is expensive, however, it is critical, it is needed, and so an option that is being used to be able to access and use this software is by copying. Okay, so as far as there are computers and software around, this action of copying the software, which is easy to make, becomes an issue, an important issue, and becomes this issue of what they have defined as piracy. Okay, software piracy. Okay, so that is the software industry, and as to why this piracy is very exclusive, what we wanted to look at, software piracy, because of the activity, or because of the scenario where these softwares are being copied easily, distributed easily. Okay. Now, when piracy happens, there's going to be implications, or there's going to be impact. Okay, and particularly the impact that is more significant. Okay, where the implications, or the the effect of this piracy is from the perspective of the developers. Okay, so all of us here, we are IT professionals, we are computing professionals, and we are part of this the side where the development and also the creation of these solutions, these IT solutions, including software. So from when piracy happens, it affects more significantly to the developers, for us, okay, on our side. And how does it impact? It impacts in two perspectives. One, from the economy, okay, so from the financial aspect. The other one from morale, okay, so from our motivation, our passion, and our responsibility as a developer of the software will also be affected. Okay, so when piracy happens, it's going to affect more significantly to the developers, and how it affects, it can affect from two perspectives: one, the economy; one is the morale. Okay. Now, what are some of the common software piracy activities that is rampant? Okay, and most of this is something that we have either accidentally or not accidentally, or even if we're not involved, we know of such activities happening. Okay, so what are some of the common software piracy activities? One is making this counterfeit copies. So counterfeit copies, which means it's not the original software, but it functions like a software that is being copied. The original version of the software is being copied, and the copy is not an original copy. Okay, so that is counterfeit copies. So that is one common software piracy, the making of these counterfeit copies. So what it does is it reproduce and then selling them to other consumers. Okay, so that's one common activity. Another common activity is distributing the counterfeit copies. So you make or the making of a counterfeit copy from an original, and then that counterfeit copies are being created again, duplicated again, and then given away. Okay, so we see a scenario, a chain of there's one original software, and then someone makes a counterfeit copy of it and then sell it. And then the one who bought the counterfeit copy starts to make more copies of the counterfeit and start distributing it. So it could be the distribution of either they sell it, or even if it's just giving it away. Okay, so that is another also common software piracy activities. And then another situation where it's common for software piracy activities to happen is when selling computers or laptops or any devices with pre-installed pirated software. I'm not so sure how it is now, but during my time, very, very long ago, when we buy a laptop or we buy a computer, part of the package of the business is that it will come with an pre-installed Microsoft, or pre-install certain softwares that we want without the understanding of, is it original software or is it pirated? Okay, so it was common before. I'm not so sure now, but during my time as a student, we tried to look for the package that is more complete at the cheapest price. Okay, so from there, there's a common activity or piracy happening there, where it could be that the software that is being pre-installed in that computer are pirated software. Okay, so that's also another common example. And then another example of a activity that includes in this piracy, when online sharing. And your time, or probably not your time, probably someone who's a bit older than you but younger than me, will start to use downloading musics or movies or any softwares, and then sharing it online, and not actually making a copy that is physical, but actually making a copy that is accessible shared via online, and particularly with having cloud technology allows it to be much more easier. Okay, and then finally, another common software piracy is shareware. That does not have any license for it to be used more than what the original license allows. Okay, so shareware is a condition of a software that was designed for it to be shared, but of course within the boundaries of whatever that you pay, and has a limitation of how it's going to, the user included in that share. Okay, but no, without control, that shareware can exceed to be used by more than what is intended or what is set to be included in that share. And so that is also considered as piracy, software piracy activities, when a software that was designed and intended to be shared, but it was shared beyond the limit of the license. Okay, so that is also another example of common software piracy. Okay, now a little bit of understanding of what piracy is and what theft is. Okay, so piracy is not theft. So the act of piracy, of making a copy, is not the same in terms of the definition of that action as in stealing, okay, or theft, okay? And hence why piracy, up until today, the way how to control, the way how to manage the issue or try to solve the issue of piracy from a legal point of view is not straightforward or as easy as the laws and regulations or the legal perspective similar to when stealing happens or theft happens, okay? Because piracy is not theft. How is it different? Okay, so in theft, or when something is being stolen, is actually a situation where the solutions or the item is removed from the original, which means that, so an example of, so let's say you are the owner and you own this particular software or technology. When it's being stolen, someone takes that software or technology and remove it from you as the owner, so that you as the owner now do not have that solution, do not have that software. That is stealing. So that falls under the laws and regulations that can be managed for the laws in terms of stealing. Okay, so that is that. But piracy is the act of copy. So you as the owner, okay, so you have the software, you own the software, and then piracy is when someone copies that software, but you have not lost that original. The original is still with you. Someone else just made a copy of the original. In that sense, it's whatever the legal ways on how to protect the piracy cannot use the same legal ways or approach for stealing, okay, because it's not in the same scenario, it's the same condition, right? So that is the difference between piracy and theft. Okay, now why piracy happens? So there are many different reasons as to why, okay, and some may resonate or may be relevant to you to determine for us to be confused if this is right or wrong. So it's not a very straightforward black and white kind of situation, but piracy can happen for various reasons. One of it could be for recreational purposes. So it could be piracy happens because it's done as a hobby to collect and play around with current programs. Okay, so either hackers or program enthusiasts, okay, programmer enthusiasts who wants to, look around on the program side, the software itself, try to break down the software just to understand how the software works. And so they do the piracy in order for them to then play around, okay, as a hobby to play around with the current program. That's a reason, okay, that's one reason why piracy can happen. Another reason, and this could be something that is much closer to us, is that the idea of the desperation of wanting or needing to use the software for reasons of studying, to gain information, and for the sake of happiness, following this concept of sharing is caring. So making the copies of the software without permission, okay, and sharing it, may not realize that that act is actually not an ethical act, okay? So that is another reason why. Another reason why piracy can happen too is when you have a network which shares the same interests. Okay, so the technology allows, so the network technology that we have now allows for people with the same interests. So in the context of software, for example, people who are needing or using or interested in the same software will have that, can use that network to share the software itself. Okay, so that is also some of the, so these are some of the different reasons that piracy happens, that seems harmless. Okay, it seems harmless. It doesn't seem to cause any harm to anyone. The intention is not to do bad to other people, okay, to be negative. It seems like a positive or safe justification, okay? And so that is some of the reasons some of piracy happens. And because of that reasons, it makes it even more difficult to protect the software from piracy. Okay. All right. So next we looked at some categories of piracy. Okay. So we looked at some of the common activities involving piracy or when piracy happens. Next, we'll look at some categories of piracy where relates back to that common activities. Okay, so one category of piracy happens when there's an actual business. So they create a business or a business exists purely for producing and selling these illegal copies of popular software packages. Okay, so that is one type of piracy that now we are looking at how it becomes illegal, or it's much clearer to define that, piracy is not good, because now we can see that how it is now crossing the line, okay, of causing some form of harm. Okay, so first, when they create a business out of producing and selling these illegal counterfeit copies, then you see a category of piracy where there's the characteristics of now it can cause harm when there are organization or business or even educational institutions that legally buys one or several copies of the original copies of the software, but then install it in many computers. Okay, so this can happen either it's intentionally or it can be unintentional if the IT people lacks the proper knowledge and awareness and understanding of this concept of piracy. Okay, so that is another category of piracy. The another type of or situations where piracy happens is when organizations or even individuals install legal original software to a computer, but then that computer is accessible via modem or by the internet, that makes it possible for that software that was original and legally installed in a computer to be downloaded as a copy of that software. Okay, so this is also another category of piracy. So the difference, so the category of piracy relates back to that common activities where software piracy happens. Okay. Now, still within the realm of understanding how piracy is happening and trying to see this from a global point of view. So this is an analysis or analytics done by some of the independent consulting firm of doing this analytics, and they're trying to look here at the 20 hotspots. Hotspots means where the area where the piracy or software license misuse is high. Okay, the numbers are high, and so they do this I think on a yearly basis, and the last data that I looked in 2024, looking for the outlook of 2025 because 2025 is still ongoing, but up until 2024 the same 20 countries are still within the list. Probably some of the countries may have moved up and down of the list, but still these 20 countries are some of the majority of these 20 countries are still within the top 20 hotspots. Okay, so the idea of trying to look at this is to show us, it indicates that piracy happens on a global scale, one. So it's not an exclusive situations where it only happens to certain countries. Second, if we looked at the list of countries here, so they've ranked to three categories, probably the highest to the lowest. Okay, so red seems to be the highest, and then blue seems to be the lowest, and yellow and orange is in the mid-range. But if we look here, the top countries are actually countries that are well developed, countries that are we consider as probably economically much higher than certain countries. Okay, so here we can see that it doesn't matter, piracy still happens. Okay, so it can happen to the most well-developed countries. It happens to the least developed countries. Okay, so we can see that piracy is a global issue. So it's not an issue, just an issue to probably underdeveloped countries or developing countries, where out of desperation of not being able to access the software legally, okay, hence had to opt to or have to opt to accessing it or using it illegally through piracy. So it doesn't seem to be the case from this analysis. Okay. So that is on more of the 20 hotspot. Further analysis to look for evidence, forensic evidence, where they try to look where unlicensed software being used. So here they identified countries, and from their analysis, 194 countries out of 195 countries around the world have forensic evidence. So they have some form of using software unethically, and in this case, without the license, which means that it could be out of piracy. And the only country that they was out of the list is North Korea, because they don't have the data to support them in their analysis to look for the forensic evidence. Okay, so this indicates that, again, this is a global issue. Okay, so this is a serious global issue, which means that awareness and appreciation of that software may not be as the level as expected globally. Okay. All right. So that is to give some idea, realization of how big of an issue software piracy is. And it's not just a regional or specific countries or situation kind of scenario. It is an issue that affects the entire world. Okay, so that is looking at those analysis. So out of all the softwares that is facing issues of piracy, what are the 10 most pirated software? Most pirated softwares are actually Windows software. And I think, it could be due to the popularity of its use. So when there's a lot of users for the software, hence the demand for availability of the software becomes higher. And so anyone who can offer at either a much lower price or more accessible, even freely, would affect the software itself. Okay, so Windows softwares are most pirated software, and out of all the Windows softwares, there are actually 10 most pirated softwares would include in the list. So Windows operating systems, Microsoft Office, Internet Download Manager, WinRAR, Nero for burning, making copies, okay, making physical copies, antivirus, Photoshop, FL Studio, Vegas Pro, AutoCAD. Okay, so these are softwares that are expensive. Okay, if you want to use the original version, and so because of that, and yet it is one of the most used software by the user, hence the demand for an alternative access to these softwares become higher. And so that creates the market for software piracy. All right. So now we've seen that it's a global issue. We've seen some of the activities and some of the categories of what software piracy is. We are aware that it is an issue that is still happening, and we can see it's still happening, particularly for softwares that are popular, that are widely used. Okay. So we understand piracy happens. Now we're trying to understand why and how piracy or software piracy is dangerous. Okay. So first we try to understand how it would be dangerous from a user side or from a user point of view. So user of the pirated software. What is the danger of that? So first of all, it is dangerous because it leaves us, the user of that pirated software, vulnerable to attacks. Why? Because 34% of pirated softwares were embedded with malware that infects a computer after being downloaded, okay, and then being installed, okay? So it leaves us vulnerable to attack because when a pirated software is being copied, they only copy the functionality of the software. They could not be able to copy the support of that software that is being provided, okay? That is being provided together as part of the original software. So they can only copy the technicality of the software. So when that happens, then we are vulnerable because we will not be included in the security support that the software provides when it is from the original software, okay? So that is the first danger, okay, of using pirated software. So what happens when we are vulnerable to attack? Then we are at risk to be exposed to access to our financial and confidential information, particularly now our informations are available digitally online. We do our banking online. We share our personal information, a lot of our personal information online through our transactions. Okay, so by using pirated software and having that software with malware that infects the computer that we use for all of our transactions, then we are at risk of illegal access to our financial and confidential information. Now, similarly, it also puts us at risk, exposed to our trade secrets, particularly this is particularly dangerous for organizations or business or companies, okay? And so if company opt to use pirated software, disregarding the security of their business, okay, their business information, then they will be at risk of these malware or intruders to access our trade secrets. Similarly, in a business where most of the information about customers, the transaction or personal records is being managed, and when you have a malware that can infect that computer that comes from the pirated software, then you are at risk at having our customers' transaction or personal records being accessed illegally. And then we are at risk to identity theft, okay, doing transactions on behalf of our identity, okay, through that. And then also we are at risk of data loss and destruction, okay, based on the attack that happened or that is caused by, that was triggered or stemmed from using this pirated software, okay. So that's the first danger. The second danger, as a user, when we use pirated software, we cannot guarantee how the performance of that software, okay? Because the support to ensure that the software works as it's intended and perform optimally requires that support from the original software, okay? But when we don't have that, then we are at risk where, or it can happen where the software might stop working when we need it the most. Okay, so imagine all of you now are doing your final year project and whatever, then you will be using different softwares. And let's say some of the softwares, or one of the softwares that you're using is a pirated software. And during that critical time of you catching the deadlines, of making sure that your system or your software or your tools or applications working, suddenly that particular software stops working and it jeopardizes the whole development of your project, okay? And that's a dangerous situation. Another danger of using pirated software is it will lead to legal problems, okay, for softwares that original and has a copyright protection to it. And if you are caught of using that pirated, then you are at risk at being charged or will have to face legal repercussions, okay? So that is another danger. Another danger, when you're using pirated software, again, you do not have the support for the usability of the software. So when softwares are being updated in order to make sure that their performance maintain at a good level, okay, at an optimum level, that you may not be able to get from a pirated software, okay? So the product or the software may not be able to update it because you are not included as part of that support. And then another danger, which is more on the humanity side, and this is where we can relate at how it's unethical, is when it puts hardworking people, the software engineers, the developers, the programmers, out of work. Okay, so if a software is being rampantly pirated, which means that no one is going to be or less purchase or less payment to the original work, then these developers, these software engineers, these programmers will not have the task or the job anymore, okay, because you cannot pay them. So that is one of the main dangers of using pirated software. So with all of these dangers, and again, I want us to all relate, when we need to do it, when we need that software, we cannot afford that software. We need that software for our purpose. So for the example of you, you need that software in order for you to develop your final year project, but it's too expensive. What do you do? Do you that, and if you do not want to opt to use pirate, which you should not, choose to use pirated software, what are your alternatives? What can you do? So there are some alternatives that you can explore, okay, or when users can explore to use the software or to use the functionality of that software. What are the alternatives? So there are several. One, there is an option where you can try to look and use the free version or the student's version of that software. Okay, so these kinds of versions may be less in terms of access to its functionality, so you won't have probably the full comprehensive features, but at least you are using it without pirated, and usually the student's version will give you all the functions that is related for a student level, okay, of that software. So that is one. Second alternative is to actually look for the software and use less expensive version. So you may not be able to use it freely. You have to pay, but probably look at the least expensive version of the software. Okay, so that is an alternative. The third alternative, if that's not possible, then you can also opt to actually search and look for alternative software, means that the software that can does similar functions and features of the software that you want but cannot afford to pay. Look for alternatives that can do similar functions. Okay, so that is to look for alternative software. And then finally, you can also check if the software qualifies for a free premium version. For example, sometimes they will have the software that they will give free, the premium version for students or academic for a specific period of time. Okay, so these are some of the alternatives to use the software without opting to use the pirated version. Okay, now, so we know the impact of that piracy, how it's dangerous as the user. Now we're trying to look at a much broader view of how piracy affects, okay? And the effect is more on the developer side or the companies on the developer side, okay? So what are the effects of piracy? First, it affects the software company and publisher, okay, which have invested years and invested time in terms of years, have invested resources such as money, people, expertise, infrastructure to develop the software. So they are being affected by that. And with that, to balance the loss, so they've used a lot of resources, spent a lot of money, but then it's being pirated. What happens is that then the software company or the manufacturer will try to figure out ways on how to compensate that, okay, to balance the loss that they have done. So they are forced to then put on higher price. Okay, so the price becomes much more expensive. Okay, and this causes users who opted to use original will then have to pay higher price for the software. Okay, so that's an effect on the software company and also the user. Okay, in this sense. Another effect of piracy that is much more worrying, okay, that worries software industry is that the lessening of competency of the industry. Okay, so the software industry will shrink, will be affected, that the market itself for that industry will be smaller. Okay, investment or money being invested in order to create new software will also be reduced. Less software, the development of the software becomes lesser as well, since they will opt to probably choose not to develop any software, because after the business calculations, they feel that they're not making money out of it, or it's not worth to embark in developing new softwares, since profit is minimal when compared to the time, the creativity, and the effort that needs to be put into place in developing the software. Okay, so when they try to balance that and they seem to see that the profit is not as expected or as needed, hence they can choose to not develop new softwares. Okay, so that is a much more worrying situation, because then the software industry, the interest in software industry could also be lessened. Okay, so it can be reduced. So you see lower interest in software industry, and as a result, new software supply decreases. So less software that are being developed, less options that are going to be developed. And when there's less options, the high price will only become higher, which means that access to the software will become much more difficult. And when that becomes more difficult, piracy will become more rampant. So it is there's this synergy between piracy and software development that needs to be controlled. And how that can be controlled is by trying to reduce or minimize piracy activity, trying to minimize the effect of piracy activities. Okay. So those are some of the effects. What other effects of piracy? So this is from the perspective of the user who are using the pirated software, where they will not get technical support. They will not be included in the warranty, and they will not be able to access or receive any upgrading from the publisher or the manufacturer of the software house. Users will face virus risk, they will face malfunctions, and even non-compatibility with tools or the other devices, okay, that are using that software. So this is more on looking at the user or the the condition of the pirated software itself. Okay, so these are some of the effects of piracy. Now, when these are being discussed, what the view that they have then understood is that there's a view that understood that all of these effects seems to only affect the software industry, very specific to the software industry. Doesn't seem to affect, or they cannot understand, or they cannot see that this affects public welfare. Okay, so ethically, it seems it's not a big issue because it only affects the small amount of people, which is only in the industry and not a public welfare. With this view, that is why questioning about the moral issue, or trying to ensure or how this is an ethical issue, was not questioned, or least questioned, okay, or least being debated with that view. Okay, so that is some of the effect of the piracy and how it affects different perspective, but the understanding seems to be that it only affects the industry and not on a wider public. Okay, so that was the idea about, or some of the challenge of trying to get the understanding that piracy is a serious issue, that piracy needs to be controlled and needs to be addressed, okay, from a legal point of view. Okay, so that was the issue with the effect of piracy. Now, because it was viewed as something that affects the industry itself will need to figure out ways on how to control the piracy. What kind of actions, what kind of solutions that we can put into place to protect the software. Now, the software from being copied illegally. So one of the ways on how they can do that is by protecting the software through licensing. Okay, so that is where or how it comes up to now. All of us are familiar when there are certain softwares that in order for you to use, you have to pay for the license. Okay, so you're not paying of buying the software, you are paying to access the use of that software. Okay, so that is one of the solutions that was put into place. So licensing. So the licensing is for individuals or users who are not the owner, and yet we wanted to use, so we are required a license to use the software. So what is this license? So the license actually is a legal document which states our right to use a software because we've already paid for the license. We already received the license. Okay, so not necessarily by pay, but we have the license legally, and that license makes it legal for us to use the software. Okay, but with a license, it's not a free for all kind of access. It's not a free access to everything. So the license provides the boundaries of what the user can use of the software. So a license will give the rights to three main things. One, it gives the right to use or operate the software as end user. It is a license that gives the right to modify software by deleting or adding and act as producer if it is permitted by that software, and it is for the purpose or the role of either producer or for development purposes. Okay, so you have the license will give that right to modify. Um, the license also, some licenses also gives the right to transfer software to other people, and this is an act as collector or distributor or seller. Okay, so this is a situation where you can have a software, and if you are given the license as a distributor, okay, and so with that license, you can transfer the rights to use the software to other people that is part of the distribution network. Okay, so that is one use of or one rights of the license depending on what the license is for. So for an individual use of the license, then the individuals have the rights to use and operate. If this is a license that is given for developer, other developer that will allow them to modify the software to fit the use of the developer, then that license will allow them to give to allow them to do the modification. And then there's another license where it allows the user who has that license to transfer the use of that software to other people, particularly this is if their functions or if in the role as a distributor. So that is one common solutions or one of the best practice solutions from software industry in order on ways to protect their softwares from being pirated is by providing this concept or this approach of licensing. Okay. Okay, so next we looked at problems of piracy. Okay, so it's similar to what we've looked into categories of piracy. We've looked at the activities that is common in software piracy. So some of the problems with piracy that software industry have yet to be able to address is when the problem comes from mistake in software licensing management. So they've come up with a solution by using licensing, but if the software licensing management is poor, okay, the management is not good, then the problem with piracy is not being solved. Okay. Another problem of piracy is when the effort to upgrade or transfer the software. Okay, and this is particularly for the distributor side. When there's no effort to upgrade or transfer the software, then that creates this problem of piracy. Okay, and then another problem of piracy, and this is more on fundamental ethical understanding, is that people do not understand or appreciate the specialty of ownership. The ones who have paid for the license, they don't understand that the benefit that comes from owning the licensing to use the software. So when they don't understand and they don't appreciate that, then they will not opt to become or to get the ownership of the software. Okay, so that is some of the big problems. Apart from those problems, there are several other problems as well, and this is more on behavioral kind of or understanding kind of issues or perspective that causes the problem of piracy. So one is the attitude, which believes that pirating or copying is not a big offense. So there's this belief that the pirating is not a big offense as compared to stealing. Okay, because stealing, you take something from someone and that the owner does not have that solutions anymore. Okay, so that's a big wrong, a big belief that that is wrong. Okay, however, only copying, no one is getting harmed, the owner is not losing anything, and so that belief makes it much more difficult to control piracy. Okay, there's also a belief that it's actually not wrong to use pirated software. Again, because of not understanding the entire ecosystem of who is being affected from this use of pirated software. So the one who uses it believes that it's not wrong. No one dies using this software. No one is getting harmed from this using software. So there is that attitude which believes that, which makes piracy still becomes a problem. And then there's also the attitude which believes it is inappropriate to tell other people the do's and the don'ts the moment he or she buys or owns a software. So there's a belief that someone who already owns a software, it is not appropriate to tell them, you have now the software, please do not pirate it, please do not make a pirate copy of this. Or if that individual or that person already owns a pirated software, it is inappropriate. There's a belief that it is inappropriate to ask, is this an original or a pirated copy? Okay, so these are more on behavioral kind of situations that creates problem with the piracy. Okay, so piracy, copy is, and that belief, all of these attitude of belief stems down to knowing that pirated copy is acquired from somebody else. So if that person, the one who gives out the pirated copy, is not really bothered about it, why should I, as the one who receives this pirated copy? Okay, so all of these attitude of this belief stems to believing that because I did not make this copy, I received this copy, or I bought this copy from someone else, and the one who made the copy doesn't seem to think that it's wrong. So why should I think that it's wrong? Okay, so this kind of mentality makes the problem with piracy something that seems to be unsolvable, okay, or cannot be addressed. Okay, so the attitude, some of these problems that we have seen happens with the piracy, and some of these starts to trigger the ethics perspective of it. Okay, so the piracy creates this ethical dilemma again, especially when the situation is not easily determined right or wrong. Okay, it's not black and white. There's this gray area where we will have this ethical dilemma. And the two main ethical dilemma when it comes to pirated copy, we can see in these two big ones. So the first dilemma is the dilemma between the nation, the countries that has the resources, has the expertise to develop the software. So their point of view, okay, their the impact to them versus the impact to or the implications to countries that needs the software but cannot afford, do not have the resources, do not have the expertise to create the software. Hence, they can only buy the software, but even buying the original software is not something that they can afford. So there's this dilemma between the countries that wants to protect the software that they have developed, okay, because they have the means to develop, versus the countries that is desperate of needing to use that software but does not have the means to pay for the software. Okay, so when you have these two perspectives, one wanting to protect, one desperate to use the software, needs to use the software, but cannot afford to buy it, that's where the dilemma happens. Okay, ethically, should the country, the rich countries who has the means to or the money to develop the software donate? If they donate, then that will impact these countries. Okay, they say that, but this is a business and blah blah blah. Okay, so their values and their the impact to them is something that they want to protect, versus the countries that cannot buy but need it, or else they will not be able to advance, okay, in their own technology. Okay, so this dilemma creates that issue. And then another dilemma is between the software developer itself and user, in a sense that users from an organization, they can also have this dilemma. So the dilemma is between software developer who wants maximum legal protection because they're the one who developed that software, is their baby, is their investment, their effort, and it's perfect. Now, how can we, of course, we want to protect it at all costs. We want maximum legal protection, versus users from an organization that thinks intellectual property, such as the software, okay, such as the knowledge of how the software is being done, the knowledge of what the software can do, is an intellectual property protection, should be minimized. Okay, so that if it's too tightly protected, access to it will be very limited. Hence, the humanity's kind of development and evolution will not be able to be fair to everyone. Okay, so that creates a dilemma as well. Software developer wants maximum legal. Organizations or users thinks that if it's too tight, it cannot be too tight, or else evolutions or innovations cannot be maximum, okay, or cannot be maximized. All right, so that is two big dilemma when it comes to dealing with piracy. Okay, so from this dilemma, the questions arises, okay, with this ethical dilemma, there's some fundamental issues that needs to be addressed. For example, in order for us to do the analysis, the ethical analysis to make sure that we are doing the right thing, first, how can we identify um, the difference between copying for negative purposes or for positive purposes? Okay, so that's one, some of the fundamental questions. Another question, when there's a use of software, by copying a software for the purpose of for studying purposes, okay, for academic purposes, is it sensible to fine or to impose penalty to students for copying software to do assignments? If yes, how do we estimate the fair amount of fines? Okay, so these are different questions that makes it much more complex to determine the ethical aspect of piracy, because it creates this dilemma, okay, this ethical dilemma. Okay. So that is on the ethical dilemma. It doesn't stop there. From that dilemma, further, as they go deep, as they explore much more on trying to solve this issue with piracy, trying to solve these ethical issues with piracy, they need more debates, they need more discussions, they need involvement of many different perspectives and different angles to come up with the solutions. And up until today, there is no fixed solutions yet for piracy. And as you can see, when we look at the analytics of the top 20 hotspots, we look at the countries, those are the same situations that is still happening up until 2024. Okay, and so that indicates that this issue with piracy is still ongoing. Okay, there's no one fit solutions that can solve piracy. So what they do now is that they engage in a lot of debates, a lot of discussions, a lot of sharing, a lot of innovations on trying to find solutions to minimize the impact of piracy or to minimize the activities of piracy. Okay, so what are some of the bases for debates? The basis for debate means what are some of the key points that are being discussed in relation to software piracy. Okay, so one of the bases or one points that they are using for debates is trying to discuss in relates to the buyer of original software pays the cost for software development, but the buyer of pirate copy does not. Okay, so that they debate on that on terms of the fairness of those who pay the original and the ones who buy for the copy, the pirate copy did not pay for the cost of software development. So they're debating from that angle. Okay, fairness in terms of the economic point of view. So from that debate, the aim or the mission is to try to figure out how to the fairness to the software companies. Okay, so the software development companies. Okay, when in the situations where they are debating that the buyer of the pirated copy does not pay for the cost of the software development, this does not help companies to get back the cost of software development that would then be used to help for them to innovate more software development. Okay, and so from a business point of view, when the no solutions or if they are not addressing the issue in terms of the fairness of that payment or for the cost of software development, this has a risk of reducing the industry of software companies. So there will be less software development companies. And when there's less software development companies, less software is going to be developed. When less software is being developed, then it will delay or it will slow down the advancement of technology. Okay, so this is one basis of debate that they are going through, okay, that still discussing up until today, okay. And in relation to that point, debate is because the fairness of paying for the costs and the buyer of pirated copy does not pay for the cost, because there's a view that says that the buyer for the pirated copy already paid for the pirate copy. The information of that is being protected, information about the software, how it runs, how it functions, how it was developed, is information that should be free and should be shared. Okay, so there's a different perspective that leads back to the issue about fairness of the payment. So if information in the software is free and to be shared, why must the technology, which is the software that is involved in managing the information or involved with the information, must be paid? Okay, so that is the conflict or the different perspectives in relation to this first point for debate related to software piracy. Okay, and then the second point that are being debated and still being debated now is debating about those getting benefits from the piracy. So who is actually getting the benefits from the piracy, and why should they be allowed to be getting this benefit? Okay, so some of the key points as part of the discussion is they're discussing about what moral rights does the pirate, the one who did the piracy, has, that they are able to freely download the software which incurred a big cost to develop. Okay, what right is that to the pirate? What right does the pirate has to infringe law related to copyrights of these softwares? Okay, so that's another point that they discuss related to the benefits. And then another subsequent sub-points that they discuss in relation to benefit is, though technology is a part of modern culture, does this mean we do not have to pay for it? Okay, so these are some of the key discussions in relation to discussing about the benefits from piracy. So that's the second basis for debate. The next basis for debate is the debating different stakeholders related to software, people involved in the software industry, people involved as a user of the industry, the community, people involved in the legal framework, okay, the regulators, all are discussing different point of view. Another point of view here is trying to look into or trying to debate, discuss about those who earn their living by depending on the technology. So this is the flip side of the second basis for debate. The second basis of debate was trying to discuss or understand from the point of view of the pirates. So what rights do they have? Why do they benefit from this piracy? Okay, why must they be the one who benefits from the piracy? So that was the second basis for the debate. The third debate is more trying to look from the perspective of the developer. Okay, those who are earning their living, okay, by depending on the technology, the one developers, and also the one who uses the software. Okay, so part of this debate, they include in the debate, do we frighten the pirate, or do we frighten in a sense that we put a mechanism to help control the pirate by probably not so actively doing the piracy because of being frightened of any repercussion to it. Okay, so that is one point that they discuss in relation to, or to discuss, to debate from the perspective of the developers and the users of the technology, as it is difficult to consider that piracy is a crime. Okay, so relate back to when we differentiate that piracy is not theft. If it's stealing, it's a clear cut that it's wrong, it's a crime. But piracy is not stealing, it's making a copy. Original is still with the owner. So how can we consider that as a crime? So the difficulty to consider that a crime, therefore, is it really threatening? So whatever the actions that we wanted to do to frighten the pirate, is it even possible? Okay, so these are questions that still ongoing. Okay, still they've been discussed, and outcome from that discussions is bit by bit trying to figure out how we can control this piracy. Okay. So that is, the second one is more on the developer and the user. Okay, so this is the base, another basis for debate, but more looking at a much larger scale of looking it as the industry and the society. Okay, so software industry and also the society as the user. Okay, so software piracy is strongly felt by the industry. Those in the software industries are going to feel the impact, the negative impact from the piracy. However, society at large does not see this as alarming. In fact, based on what they are debating, it seems that they prefer or they are more preference to piracy, pirated software. Okay, why? Why is that an issue? So from their debate, they find that there is a view that the pirated software gives the opportunity to get the software at a cheaper price. Okay, so that was one. Second, it gives the opportunity to make evaluation before buying the original. So kind of like testing it. And on a much more fundamental issue with software is that it speeds up. So society finds that they like or they prefer pirated software because they believe or they feel that it speeds up computer literacy. Excuse me. It speeds up computer literacy or technology gap in developing countries. So this relates back to the dilemma of countries who may not have the capacity or the resources to develop, but they still need to use it, which means that they need to buy the software. However, they may not be able to afford. So when they cannot afford, which means that these developing countries in terms of their computer literacy will be slow. So in order to speed up, they need to use or have access to this software, and they may opt for piracy in order to speed up the computer literacy. So this is an issue they're debating on, trying to find a balance on protecting or minimizing the software piracy, but at the same time, understanding of certain aspects, certain parts of the society that is desperate and may not be proponent to a very protected approach to software piracy. Okay? So those are some points that basis for debates. So what I mean by basis for debates is these are still in discussions with many different perspectives, many different stakeholders in relation to piracy, and it is still ongoing because there is no one fixed solutions to that can 100% solve or address the issue with piracy. Okay. So that is on the basis for debate. Next, we'll try to look at some of the existing solutions or existing protections that are available that is being imposed or that is being used right now to at least somehow manage or control piracy. Okay, so there are some laws on protection. So there are different types of protection that can be used to protect something that is similar to software. So there are patents, we have copyrights, we have trademarks, etc. But all of these laws for protection were originated from the West, okay, the Western country, the Western culture. So they are the one who designed and created all of these laws on protection with the intention to, of course, provide protections from this illegal or unauthorized use of solutions. Okay, so these laws on protections are not laws on protections only for software. These are the types of different protections for many different things in terms of writings, in terms of products, in terms of innovations. Okay, a lot of it can be protected by any of these laws. However, this was originated from the West. Now, why these kinds, or why the laws on protections that we mentioned just now, the patent, the copyrights, the trademarks, all of that, why did it come from the Western? Because when we observe or when we study, Western values are very highly appreciative and gives preference to protect any creative work, such as works by artists, author, reporter. Okay, so their values, okay, or their culture, they acknowledge the value of any creative work, and so that value needs to be protected. Hence why they created the laws for protecting these solutions. Okay, so for example, even creators such as glassblower, goldsmith, photographer, watchmaker, carpenter, welder, whatever that they produce, okay, whatever that they produce originally for them, must be protected because they acknowledge the value of these works, okay, even though it's creative work, that it is valuable, okay, and so that was the motivation why they have the that kind of law protection, okay. So in the West, every creation, okay, is given a copyright protection. So when it is created originally, automatically in the West, they must first put in copyright protection, okay? And that copyright protection is used to recognize and respect the creativity of the creator. Okay, so we always see the C inside the circle, so that's a one of protection, okay, if it's copyright protected. Now that's in the West, okay? So that is in the West that we adapt to here as part of the global community where we adapt. However, now trying to reflect to our culture, our values, the Eastern values is very contrasting to the West. Now in Eastern values, as in Asia and Asian culture, emphasizes that individual developer or creator has a social responsibility. Okay, those see someone wanted to share, wants to join. Okay, so in our culture, in our Asian culture, there's a belief or emphasize that anyone who creates, anyone who has the intelligence, who has the means, who has the resources to develop or create something, has a social responsibility to share their creation with the society. So we are a very sharing kind of community-based as compared to the Western, who are very individualistic in terms of their culture. Okay, so there's no right or wrong here, but we're trying to see that it's contradicting. So when we try to protect, when we try to impose, or we want to put um, uh, an approach to address about piracy, which is something that is very complex in terms of determining what kind of protection, we can see that sometimes it may not be feasible to follow one values or one culture, which is in the West, where they come up with a very structured way of approach to do the protection of the software, because it contradicts with, in an Eastern value, those kinds of laws may contradict, may not be able to be applied because of this culture where those who develops and creates has a social responsibility to share their creation with the society. So if we borrow, and this is highlighted when we looked at a saying by a Chinese maxim that says that he that shares is to be rewarded, he that does not condemn. Okay, so those who shares things are highly respected. Okay, hence why the conflict, the ethics of piracy is something that is difficult to determine a global ethics, uh, global ethics actions, or global ethics decision to be exercised on a global scale that is universal or standard. Okay, because when in software piracy, because they are being copied and then being shared in East culture, in our culture, if we share, we are respected. We are not being stingy. We are a member of a community. So such value and education makes the Chinese believe that it is not wrong. So this is not just Chinese, but more on the Eastern beliefs that it is not wrong to share anything, which should include software. Okay, so this is the view of researchers or thinkers from the ethical point of view when they are discussing or when they view how software piracy issue, about the software piracy issue. Okay. So what does the Eastern value say that needs to be understood in order to come up with solutions that would be fair about the software in terms from the developer and also the user and every other stakeholders involved with the software itself. Okay, so what does the Eastern value says? To promote, encourage and appreciate sharing and collaborations. Our value also says that every member of society is highly valued for sharing knowledge and help each other. Those gifted with high level of intellectual must help those with less intelligence. Social responsibility is strongly emphasized in daily lives. Okay, so these are the gist or the summarization of what Eastern value, about Eastern value. Okay, so hence, because of that value, the third world and Asia believe that copyright is a concept created by the West to remain their monopoly in the distribution and production of knowledge and knowledge-based product. Okay, so they believe because it contradicts with their value. So copyright seems to be a way how the West wanted to monopolize the knowledge. Okay, so the debates are continuously being done to discuss and to determine either copyright could last as it is now, getting easier and easier to do the copying. Okay, so those who support copyright urge copyright laws should be amended. So as it is, the copyright laws cannot be as how it is determined or defined now. So it needs to be modified, needs to be amended, needs to be much more inclusive of these different values. Okay, so because of that, based on that debate to continue, and one of the suggested solutions is that copyright laws should be amended, and then other solutions or other approach in order to help with the piracy is in terms of methods to ease the payment or ease the transactions for using material which is copyright protected. Okay, making it easier to pay, making it easier to access it legally. Okay, so that is one of the points that are being debated as well, where they wanted to merge or they wanted to be more inclusive between the West and East values. And then they're also discussing in terms of the copyright law should be amended to also clarify the laws about copyright, because as it is still vague and not clear. Okay. So with all of the debate, and also we've seen some of the solutions that are available, and we've seen how the existing solutions is not perfect. It is not still helpful in order to address the issue with piracy. And from that solutions, we can see the difference in terms of values between the West and the East and the conflict that happens. Hence, the approach, the existing approach seems to be imperfect because of this conflict of values related to the values of pirated software or piracy issues. Okay, so we've discussed up to there, and we've also acknowledged and know that ongoing debate and discussion is still going on, is still being discussed in terms of trying to find or trying to refine the ways of how to address the piracy. Okay, so with whatever ongoing solutions that debate that are going on, they are still also included in that effort is to always try to understand why piracy occurs, why it still occurs, because one, copying is easy to do. The second one, the duplicated software can function equally good as the original. There's a lack of awareness about copyright laws and regulations. There's a lack of government involvement to enforce laws and regulations. The lack of understanding the specialty of original software. They cannot see the value of an original software. And finally, due to, from a humanities point of view, being greedy and careless, and not being aware of the impact of piracy. Okay. So copying is done for the following reasons. So as you can see that why does the piracy occurs in the listed above, to support that, it is still done up until today. It is because of these three main reasons. One, the motivation to save costs. Let me just check. Why is it still someone trying to join? So one motivation of why piracy and copying is still done is because they wanted to save costs. Okay. The other motivation is the view that the distributor of pirated software is legal. Okay, because especially when it is not for profit gain. And then another reason, another big reason why piracy is copying is still done is because it doesn't seem to directly harm anybody because it is not stealing in the real sense. And so the original software still remains with the owner. So there's lack of urgency when they see that it does not literally and directly harm anybody. So there's the ethical issue here seems to be very minimal or almost none. And so when that happens, then piracy still occurs. Okay. So even though piracy still occurs, even though realizing that whatever the solutions or the approach now to address piracy still is in progress, debate is being done, suggestions is being done. However, control measure to piracy is still needed, is still critical. Doesn't matter if it's a Western value or Eastern value, although it's conflicting, but both agrees that there must be some ways or measure to control the impact or the negative impact of piracy. Okay, so there are control measures. So these are some of the control measures so far that has been put into place, that has been put into actions, but yet still needs to be refined. Okay, so the first control measure is amending the copyright law. So as highlighted in before, saying that one of the discussion points is knowing that the copyright law needs to be amended, needs to be modified. Okay, it's not relevant and it may not be relevant with the conflicting values. Okay, so for the amend copyright law, the Federation Against Software Theft, or FAST, F-A-S-T, has convinced the US Parliament to amend the related law after discovering that 38% of software has been illegally copied worldwide. Okay, so there are efforts to amend copyright law. Second, doing many campaigns, many different campaigns to create awareness, to educate. Okay, so on anti-piracy campaigns, so Software and Information Industry Association, SIIA, has been conducting campaigns on anti-piracy. The enforcement of law should be accompanied with education so as to make the effort effective. Okay, so anti-piracy campaign more on trying solutions more on to educate society and people to not opt for piracy, to give them awareness of the effect of piracy. Okay. So in the anti-piracy campaign, the way how the campaign or the view of that campaign is divided into two. One is to educate user about copyright laws and acts and providing the needed information. And the second view is to emphasize on the importance of copyrights and trademarks. Okay. Now, with all of efforts and countermeasures and debates and understanding the conflict of it, understanding how it's difficult to determine the right standardized global ethical view of piracy. So we've discussed that. To close it down, to close off that, we understood that piracy is still an issue and it is still a controversial issues because of some of these reasons. So one controversial issues with piracy is, although there is law, programmers or software people in the software industry claims that the problem still exists because of the nature of software itself, which is unique and as a creative creation. Okay, so that is some controversial issues that is still being part of the debate, okay, that they are doing. Another issue that's controversial is the ease of that software to be copied. And yet, to trace the copying is not easy since the original copy remains in place and not affected. So this makes it difficult to be protected by law. Some countries do not even really bother. And then another controversial issue is the difficulty to detect software that has been stolen. When the software is stolen or copied, there will be another software created based on the idea of the stolen software. Okay, so copying of that idea, copying of the software itself makes it difficult to protect because even if it's stolen or copied and actions has been taken, there will be another software that creates that steals the idea, okay, that recreates the idea of the stolen copy. Okay, so the main issue here in this nature, okay, controversial issue is how much idea can be taken before plagiarism can be labeled, particularly on plagiarisms on software. Okay. And then other controversial issues, some programmers do not take legal actions at all because they're not sure or uncertain of the laws or regulations. We can see another issue is that the software thieves do not know that their doings are categorized as stealing. And then finally, copyright laws or acts only focus on printed information. It does not protect idea and concept in the format or in the way how software is, because software is not tangible. Copyright law and act, they focus on printed information. So any information or any creation that can be in physical form, the copyright law and act can protect. But software is not something that we can freeze it or have it transform into physical form or tangible form. Okay, and so when that's not possible, then the copyright law may not be able to be imposed, okay, on software. Okay. Okay. And then, so finally, to conclude, our discussion on piracy is that it's still ongoing. It is still serious. It is still critical. Debates are persistent. Okay, they are continuous. Experts are still debating, are still discussing, are still trying to find ways or mechanism to address software piracy. And yet, software, and another controversial issue is part of that debate is to figure out which law should help to control or should be involved in software protection. Okay, so if we refer back to what the Western has designed or has developed as a protection, they have the intellectual property protection. Is that protection suitable for software protection? There are some issues. Okay, so what are the issues? The special rights of the creator, author, artist, writing, and literary work. So these are the people or the work that is being protected by intellectual property protection. However, in that intellectual property protection, they did not include software because when they wanted to include the people for that software, they can't determine who actually owns the software. Is it the programmer or the firm or the business that pays the programmer? When that cannot be determined, intellectual property protections may not be effective to help to protect software. There's another law, copyright law. So copyright law is, again, like highlighted before, it must be in something that is physical or tangible. So if it's in writing, it can be an information that is put on paper. If it is a product that is being produced, we can have the physical product, okay? But software is a version of idea coded in various languages, okay? So copyright law and act could not overcome hidden copying problem. Okay, so that is another law, potential law, but still have weaknesses or still have handicaps in the law that may not be able to fully address piracy. And finally, we have patent system. Okay, so patent is one form of protection for ideas and products. However, for software, this suggestion to protect software under the patent system law was rejected by the International Bureau of the Worldwide Intellectual Property Organization. The reason why WIPO rejected the use of patent systems to protect software is because patent is not for computer software. Okay, and so it makes it easier for actually, if we wanted to use computer software using the patent system, it actually may not benefit to protect the software, because when you apply for, when it is protected by the patent, everything needs to be disclosed, okay, as part of the patent. And so that disclosure will make it easier for other parties to gain information about the software. Hence, efforts to copy, efforts to plagiarize the software will become much higher, okay? And that is all what we are discussing today. So today's topic, just in a quick summary, we're talking about piracy. We're talking about software piracy, and it is some.
好细腻哦。哦，他讲完了。
Okay, and it is something that should be very close to us, very impactful to all of us here, because we are all computing professionals. Some of you, or most of you, are software engineers. Okay, and so we are all in this industry where we are part of the development of software, we are part of the creator of softwares, we are part of the user of the softwares. Okay, and that awareness and responsibility towards that software must be shared, okay, must be protected. But how to protect it as best as possible, it is something that is still ongoing. All right, I see that there's someone who is putting their hands up to ask the questions. Any questions? Any questions?
No, doctor.
Okay. All right, if there is no questions, then this lecture is recorded and I will put it up in UKM Folio later. I will also put up last week's lecture. I forgot to put up last week's lecture. So it should be available soon in UKM Folio. If there's no questions, then I'm going to stop our recording for now. Donna. Okay, so I will stop the recording.